Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Organic and Natural Health 20 Election Roundup. Our objective today is really to give you as much information as we have related to the elections and the midterms. So we'll be here 2 or 3 days. Just kidding. Actually, what we want to focus on is really how much will impact us as an industry. And from that, I mean not just necessarily the dietary supplement world, but also some of our state-related activities and certainly our activities related to the natural health component of what we do, including things like regenerative agriculture, some of the state referendums. So we're going to lead you through this. Our team today, as we have assembled it, is myself. I'm Karen Howard, the CEO of the Organic and Natural Health Association. And I'm joined here at the Venable headquarters by Todd Harrison, who is also our president, Charlie Brown, Consumers for Dental Choice, who is also on the board of directors as our treasurer, and Alan Lewis, who's on our call, not on this list, who is a member of the board with Natural Grocers, and then Jonathan Posey, who you may not all be familiar with. Jonathan is a new member of the organization as the CEO and founder of Council of Holistic Health Counselors. And Jonathan was really instrumental in our first Capitol Hill Day, where we had several of you come in and meet with your constituent members across the country, had several really great meetings and gained a great deal amount of insight, all of which we were focused around our vitamin D petition. That also served us as a good indicator of what we're walking into now, which is essentially a House that's run by Democrats and a Senate that's run by the Republicans. So I'm going to let Jonathan do the recap on some of the changes that have occurred in the House and the Senate. Jonathan, if you want to go ahead and get a good start on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Karen. As she said, I am the founder and executive director of the Council of Holistic Health Educators. And what we're looking at is, of course, the Democrats, as Karen was saying, will control the House. Republicans will control the Senate. We're unlikely to kind of see any movement on the anti-supplement legislation in 2019 that we've kind of seen in the past. The caucus leadership of the Dietary Supplement Caucus has been upended by the elections, and it really won't be until January that we start to figure out where folks are going to start falling in terms of leadership and committee assignments. So the next 2 years, that is to say the next 2 years are going to have a lot of fireworks, but will also be overshadowed by the elections for 2020. Republicans will have 22 seats to defend, including the presidency, and about a dozen senators are already vying for the spotlight as potential presidential candidates. So that's going to create a little bit of chaos going between the two chambers. In terms of Congress, there are still some races to be decided for both the House and the Senate, but kind of here's what we know so far. Democrats will control with at least 10 seats advantage, 228 to 198 as it stands now, but there are still a few elections that are still needing to be decided. In essence, the red states got more red, and the blue states kind of dispensed with some of the Republicans in their midst. It is all but certain that Ms. Pelosi will be the speaker, but unlike 2006, it's going to be a little tougher to unite the more far left-leaning members of her caucus. Of course, with the split chambers, Democrats in the House, Republicans in the Senate, the two sides are going to have to work really hard to try to figure out and get some of their more important things done. But it is going to force them to work more together. So while it's a split, it's going to be a little chaos with the different caucuses. It's still going to be a very interesting time as they try to work through these things. Now, depending on how well or not the Democrats can organize themselves, we're likely to see lots of hearings on the Trump administration, a lot of bluster, finger pointing, but I don't think we're going to see a lot of big things getting done. Now, for the supplement industry, that's actually kind of a good thing. First, I think we're unlikely to see any legislation move very far on banning sales or moving supplements behind the counter. While our friends, Senators Blumenthal and Durbin, are certainly, they're going to be in the minority, they're still probably going to try to move some bills. We might see a bill in terms of military bases and supplements on military bases, but I don't see them going very far, not without significant support. And between Karen's work and others, I don't see that happening. As far as members changing, moving up, we're going to see quite a turnover of the Dietary Supplement Caucus. Jared Polis, who was the co-chair for the House, he is now the governor of Colorado. Senator Orrin Hatch, the Senate co-chair, is retired. Representative Mia Love, who was the House co-chair, she lost her re-election bid. In the rank and file, the only notable thing we really have is Darrell Issa of California did not run for re-election. So the caucus has been sort of blown apart by that. It is possible that we'll see Frank Pallone of New Jersey move into the chairman's position of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. This is a very powerful committee that has significant jurisdiction over some of our supplement issues. We're looking at probably Representative Anna Eshoo of California is the heavy favorite to lead the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee, which is the committee that will have jurisdiction over things like the Affordable Care Act and the FDA. On the Senate side, Senator Martin Heinrich has been a champion to the industry, but it's unclear where he's going to move in the hierarchy of the leadership or even the committee caucus yet. His committees don't have the most bearing on the industry, but with the exception of military and armed services, we could see him be pivotal in other bills, such as if someone tries to, Durbin or Blumenthal introduces another ban to ban the supplements on the sale of military bases. I expect him to probably stay as the Senate co-chair of the Supplement Caucus, but it's really unclear at this time who's going to kind of move into that vacuum and fill this pretty large vacuum since we both lost Senator Hatch and Congressman Chaffetz this past year in terms of our champions on supplements. So it could be Senator Scott of South Carolina, although he hasn't been very involved in the past. Duckworth of Illinois, maybe. We do have one benefit, and that is newly elected Senator Sinema of Arizona is a big supporter of supplements and overall holistic wellness. And so we might see her join the caucus, and certainly we might see her kind of take up the role as we move along. So with the Republicans maintaining their majority in the Senate, we shouldn't see any leadership turnover, but again, we're not going to really find out a lot until probably the second or third week of January, when all the information is going to come out in terms of committee assignments, caucus leadership races. So it'll just be in between there and there. We'll have to kind of see how that rolls. On the administrative side, we're going to see major turnover at the White House, but the agencies, I think, are likely to keep humming along. In my opinion, I don't think we're going to see any movement on the NDI process, certainly not with the president's goal to scale back rulemaking. And really, unless something major breaks, Congress is probably going to leave town around December 15th. That's the big moment, big rumor, excuse me, and it could change at any moment. So really between now and then with Thanksgiving, it's really unlikely we're going to see anything major move, but this is Washington, so we're kind of just keep an eye on everything. Does anyone have any questions?
People don't have the ability to actually ask questions at this point.
Okay, I just want to check, make sure it might be silent. Yes, sir.
This is Alan. I get to ask a question, but
yeah,
back to Anna Eshoo, who might potentially have leadership on energy and commerce. She is kind of acting under the mantle of our friend Henry Waxman. Do you have a feeling whether she's actively anti-dietary supplement at this point or just passively?
I don't. Off the top of my head, I don't know if she's actively against dietary supplements. She's a Silicon Valley representative. I don't see it. I don't see it as something that's going to be a major thing for her. I've worked with her and I've known her a little bit, but I don't see it as something that she's going to really want to spend time on.
And Frank Pallone will be chairman, am I right? Or you cut out a little bit?
That's the rumor. There's some other folks there that he might be up against. But, it's generally considered that he's the presumptive. But again, we're not going to really know this probably for a couple of weeks. Leadership elections are going to be held in a couple of weeks. So, gosh, I don't really see it unless it's someone, DeGette's still there. I think that it's a long shot that DeGette's going to get it. So Yeah, I mean, the only really person who kind of has the clout and really can muscle their way in. I mean, he's been ranking member since 2015, so I can't see anyone really challenging him for that. He's much too powerful.
Yeah.
So some of the cultural changes and shifts that we saw as a result of the midterm elections, I think, are really worth talking about for a few minutes. And the most obvious one for me is the number of women that are now in Congress, which right now is 107 in this particular Congress until election night. We've never held more than 84 of the 435 seats in the House. And with votes still being counted, 101 women have officially been declared winners in the House of Representatives. Obviously, the House re-elects every 2 years. In the Senate, as of this morning, given Arizona's results, we now have 14 women in the Senate who were elected in the Senate for a total of 24. That includes those, of course, who didn't run. We have, just as an aside, we have 9 women who've been elected governor, and in Michigan, Democrats elected a woman for every statewide office on Tuesday's ballot: governor, U.S. senator, attorney general, and secretary of state. In total, Washington Post tracked 277 women running for candidates for Congress and governor, and we still have results pending for now 6. So in addition to that shift, there's also been a shift of, obviously, incumbents being left by the sidelines in larger numbers than was anticipated, and also an increase in the number of veterans and minorities who were elected. So Organic and Natural has held 2 Hill Days this year. The first one, the Vitamin D Day, was for sure right in our bandwidth, meeting with people who were either predisposed to what we do or certainly as constituents were forced to listen to the value of vitamin D and the impact on society on that. I will tell you as an aside that we have met with, and you should have read in your newsletter, we have met with the FDA on vitamin D. We have identified those sticky points where they are having issues relating to the fact that nutrition can be measured by serum level versus dose response. So that is exactly as we anticipated, and what we are waiting for now is for them to have the opportunity to post our petition for comment. They have till December 10th to do that, so we'll be writing a letter as that gets nearer if they don't voluntarily do that. So now that is with a nice bellwether in terms of how members are feeling around those issues. We went back to the Hill with like-minded organizations on a slightly different topic. In this case, it was actually something called the PRIME Act, which is an agriculture issue related to grass-fed beef. And as you know, we're very strong proponents of the grass-fed issues because it is the best, quickest path to regenerative agriculture and certainly supports the quality of the supply chain that we all hope to aspire to every day. So we went up with American Grass-Fed and other parties, and our intent was to meet with progressive members of Congress who traditionally have voted against us. So it was us, American Grass-Fed Association, Organic Consumers Association, and what we found was a new way of being on some of the most progressive and liberal congressional office that you could find. So we were talking to people who are more urban related that had actually been visiting farms, working on a conversation around a bipartisan bill and its companion bill. So we know that there's traction to get, and it's a meat processing issue that is highly restrictive for grass-fed farmers who don't want to transport their beef, their herds long distances, which defies all rationale for them, because the requirement is that your meat must be processed by a federal inspector. So there seems to be great bipartisan interest in solving a problem that would be extremely beneficial to the interests that Organic and Natural has. As a part of that learning that we did and knowing that we were looking at a democratically controlled House, we ran up against a cultural awakening in terms of caucuses. Sometimes I feel like the dietary supplement caucus is a caucus without a cause. It's there as a defensive posture versus being progressive in terms of how to get our issues in front of congressional people in a way that they can hear them. And so some of the caucuses we learned about was the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls, the Children's Caucus, there's obviously the Caucus on Women's Issues, and interestingly, Rosa DeLauro, who is will be the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, was one of the strongest proponents of this piece of legislation. So I find that fascinating. It gives us a new way to talk to members of Congress. I believe, although I have not found it, that Ms. DeLorean has created a caucus on babies that works really well for us on vitamin D, in my opinion. So I think those are interesting opportunities to approach and educate. Obviously, that is a longer-term strategy than what we will see in the next 2 years, but very worthwhile to meet up with people and have a conversation around the power of dietary supplementation in relationship to not just regenerative agriculture issues, but true health issues. One obstacle I see before I turn it over to Todd to give his impressions in terms of the implications on the agencies for FTC and FDA is that the Senate will be basically a playground, or sandbox might be a better word, for those who are seeking to run for president in the year 2020. So I think, along with all the other things that seem to bog down Congress, that one will have that will be an interesting dynamic to watch, because that obviously that race is going to heat up very quickly. And Todd, if you'd just like to opine a bit about how you think any of this will impact the agencies and their decision-making process.
Well, I think there's not going to be much change at the agencies. I think that we have, when you have a divided Congress like this and a power vacuum that's being filled, the agencies actually feel more emboldened to legislate themselves, though they're not technically supposed to legislate. They will feel like there's probably a little oversight going on at this point, and they will feel probably a little freer to even be more aggressive in certain areas. When you look at the FDA and the FTC over the last few years, the FDA has gotten considerably more aggressive with warning letters. They have not gotten more aggressive in enforcement actions, but it has gotten more aggressive with warning letters to supplement companies. I think we'll continue to see that path. I also do think at some point the FDA is going to have to make a decision on what it wants to do about CBD, whether that is to actually institute a real enforcement action rather than sending warning letters, or whether it will actually enter into conversations with the stakeholders regarding the status of CBD. A lot of that will also depend at some point whether we ever get a farm bill passed that deschedules hemp or cannabis sativa that is less than 0.3%. I think that is an important mark for FDA, because I think FDA feels a little constrained right now because it is a Scheduled 1 and it does not want to be looking like it is doing anything different than what the DEA is doing. The Federal Trade Commission remains to be the Federal Trade Commission. They are active, and they will continue to be active. I think you're going to still see a lot of activity in the states. I think that the state of California is not going to let up. I think that task force of DAs out in California will continue to be aggressive in trying to tamper down claims or what they believe to be impermissible disease claims. So overall, I just don't think there's a lot of impact on the selection for the supplement industry itself. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of impact on the natural health industry either. I think we're going to have 2 years of infighting and subpoenas, and I think at some point that inertia takes over, as well as a bunch of Senate Democrats running for President of the United States. So, for the next 2 years, I think you're going to be at the mercy of the FDA and the FTC. I don't think there's going to be a lot of oversight given to them over these next 2 years.
Todd, you've often said that the provision in the Senate Farm Bill that deschedules hemp does not solve all our problems with CBD.
It absolutely doesn't. All it does is deschedule hemp. There's still a significant issue of whether CBD can be marketed in a dietary supplement. And I know there was a robust discussion at Supply Side West. We two attorneys agreeing with each other, and the other two attorneys disagreeing with those two attorneys. But the bottom line here is that FDA has sent out warning letters. FDA, if they're going to make the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act not a joke, they can't send out warning letters and continue to ignore real enforcement action. As many clients told me, I can handle a warning letter because it's nothing but a paper tiger. Also, be forewarned, at some point these plaintiff attorneys will pick up on it and they're going to start filing lawsuits for marketing an unlawful drug.
On whose behalf?
On behalf of citizens of the United States, or of the individual states, I should say. And I would also like to comment on one other thing, the vitamin D petition. I think our vitamin D petition shows the fatal flaws within the agency's thinking. I sat there in shock and awe at the same time when we were having a discussion about vitamin D levels in a particular study. And while FDA initially objected that that was a ad hoc review of the data to show that you got the women who blood levels got above 40 nanograms per deciliter, that they had a reduced risk of preterm birth, in the end, they kind of abandoned that argument and actually went with an even more spurious argument, and that was that you didn't control for sunlight. When we explained to the agency that most of the people in the study were lower income, minority, working class people, and that they weren't likely out there sunbathing, and that logic defied common sense, they actually said to us, and I quote, "Science does not recognize common sense." Well, the last time I've lived and learned throughout my whole life, common sense generally trumps science. In this instance, it is absurd that they could take a position that hurts minorities more than anyone else, minorities of skin color, because you didn't control for the sun. In a population group that would not be affected by the sun, the amount of sun exposure you have to get would be absurd amount. But this is what you deal with when you think when you have a agency that's so rigidly controlled by the scientific method. It cannot get out of its way. So it's an uphill fight. And they even admitted that our petition was different because we actually told the truth, that you have to work with your physician to get your vitamin D levels out. Instead of saying absurd things like helps lower cholesterol, which will reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. It doesn't tell you to work with your physician. None of the health claims tell you to work with your physicians, and it should.
Thank you, Todd. So needless to say, there is much more coming on that subject. Hopefully by the time we get to our event on January 22nd and 23rd, we'll have more information on that, and the board will obviously be taking that up thoroughly. That's a great segue, though. I just want to add on the referendum around cannabis is that I love this word. Two of the prohibitionist members of Congress, Sessions of Texas and Godlatte of Virginia, were defeated. And, of course, we have lost Sessions as Attorney General. So that genie is still out of the bottle. The marijuana was legislation that passed at the state level was passed in Michigan for recreational, Missouri and Utah for medical. And then new governors who support recreational use were elected in Connecticut, Minnesota, and Illinois. So you see where the trend is. I'm going to try and get through governor's races really quickly because I want Charlie to, and the local issues, because I want Charlie to have the stage for Attorney General. But I can tell you that we're now at 25 Republicans and 23 Democrats. Florida and Georgia clearly outstanding. The pickups were only in Alaska for the Republicans. Democrats picked up in Nevada, New Mexico, Kansas, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, and Maine. 12 of the governor's races were considered toss-ups, and I think this is the most invaluable thing to take. Of those, only 2 had a vote spread of more than 3 points. That was Kansas and Maine that both went blue. So in terms of trying to predict trends around this, I'd say be very careful about that because everything is running really close to the vest in terms of vote counts. Medicaid has been expanded in another 3 states, Idaho, Utah, and Nebraska, Maine likely to follow, and Kansas, although with these governors who have been elected that might be blue, there are still Republican state legislatures behind them. So this is basically the states expanding their pool so that the feds are picking up more money to cover more people under those health plans. It embeds Obamacare that much more deeply. On environmental issues, California passed Prop 10. California always passes something, right? That requires more housing space for hens, pigs, and calves. Not a bad process, not very well defined though, and out-of-state suppliers will be required to comply. So that's going to have some interesting implications on cage-free and grass-fed kinds of things. I will add to that though, there's a provision in the House Farm Bill that is, sitting kind of dead in the water right now that would require states to allow anything to be sold as long as it wasn't prohibited by federal law. So the trend for Republicans to be against states' rights also lives on. Washington passed an initiative prohibiting any additional soda tax statewide, which they've already got one. Oregon rejected a similar proposition. And Portland, of course it is Portland, passed a clean energy initiative that is a 1% surcharge for national retail businesses who gross revenue exceeding $1 billion annually, which includes also a $500,000 in revenue in Portland sales. So this is a trend that we're starting to see on the uptick. Charlie, I'm going to turn this over to you to go through the AGs.
Thank you very much, Karen. And I do want to speak. I'm a former state attorney general and very honored to be a board member of the Organic and Natural Health Association. And those are the roles that I think are important to us, the roles of the attorneys general. The consumer protection is at the top of the list because they are that's where they intersect with our industries. Sometimes not for the better, but and our people. But keep in mind also that it is very little of this is preempted. Many other things are preempted. There's a debate of whether the feds can stop this or that in many areas of regulation. But in the area of consumer protection, there's a huge overlap. That is, if the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, decides not to do something, or the attorneys general can do it anyway, or FTC can even be on the opposite side and they can go in. So at certain times. So FDA is sometimes a little more complicated because FDA is more regulatory, but they can also go in there as well at certain times. So the consumer protection power is the one we look to the most, and one aspect of that is it is quite independent. You look to the third item, lawyer for the governor and all state agencies, there is pretty much the lawyer like a lawyer would be in the private sector, closely, not totally, because they do have an independent role and they do have the ability to say, no, you can't do this. And lawyers in the private sector do too, but here's a situation where the AG can be very public about it. Private lawyers really can't be. But on consumer protection, there's no client. There's no state agency in almost every state. That is, the Attorney General himself or herself and his or her staff are the ones that can move forward. Attorneys General provide opinions of law. That's mattered to us. There's certainly some hemp issues. There's been opinions, so we certainly pay attention to that. And then the multi-state. And that's really the only area where it's partisan. And you do see you saw during the Obama administration, Republican AGs were suing frequently, sending letters when they weren't suing, and today it is now the shoe's on the other foot. You have Democrats jumping in collectively, but really it's sometimes it has an impact. Frequently it's much ado about nothing. It is a very publicity-oriented area, but for us, I don't think it's very important because I'm not sure how important it is if the state AG feels a certain way on a federal issue. It might be important, but rarely. One issue not on that is the criminal area. And why is that not on there? Well, really, the AGs don't have a lot of criminal authority. We think they do. They're the chief law enforcement officer. Well, the DAs, the county prosecutors, their district attorneys, state's attorneys, whatever you call them in your state, are the ones who prosecute crime. The Attorney General does sometimes have a special prosecutor role in rare circumstances, and the Attorney General is often the lawyer on appeals to the state Supreme Court. That's quite common. But in terms of directly being the prosecutor, that's at the local level. The only states where the Attorney General is the prosecutor, period, there's no local prosecutors, are the two smallest states in size, Delaware and Rhode Island. So generally, that's why criminal isn't on there, even though the first thought is, oh, they do criminal work. Well, not a whole lot. So let's go on to the new attorneys general because we are talking about elections. There were 12 new women and men who were elected attorney general. The biggest change, as you see, is in the Midwest. There were 6 6 new attorneys general, pretty much dominating the Midwest. Most of the attorneys general will be new in office in the Midwest. The Northeast, there's still 3, as you see: Connecticut, Delaware, New York. New York's obviously quite important to us, and I'm going to talk about the big states, the big 8 states, in the next slide. Florida has a new attorney general, and in the West, Nevada and Colorado. Now, there'll be at least 2 more new ones. There are 5 states where the governor appoints the attorney general. There's no election. The governor appoints, like governor might appoint a department head. It is a department head, in fact, under 5 state constitutions. The reason Alaska and Wyoming are not named there is a new governor was elected. So presumably, certainly in the change of party in Alaska, the governor will appoint, and probably Wyoming too. New Jersey didn't have an election. Their governor just appointed the AG a year ago, and New Hampshire, the same governor was reelected, same with Hawaii, so I wouldn't expect a change necessarily. Party control shifted in 4 states. That's actually a fair number, although you think out of 50 it's not. There weren't 50 elections. There were 30-some elections, though, but only 4 states, but they were significant. Those are pretty big states. And then the next line, as you see, is there was only 1 incumbent beaten, and that is Wisconsin, and that is different. There were 2 incumbent governors beaten. There were obviously several, I think 4 perhaps, incumbent senators beaten, and there were many members of the U.S. House defeated. But an AG is Attorney General it has huge advantages once they're an incumbent in terms of getting name recognition. It's hard to build statewide name recognition for a politician or for somebody jumping into politics. The incumbent has all that goes on, and in the past there wasn't much money to defeat them, although now there is, because there's a Republican Attorneys General Association and a Democratic Attorneys General Association. But in beating an incumbent and barring barring major mistakes by the incumbent, personal mistakes that might defeat her or him. But otherwise, Wisconsin was a state where the governor was tossed out, so it defeated for re-election. So that went down ballot, and it frequently does. That is, the Attorney General is not something that people feel real strongly about. They do feel strongly about governor quite frequently, so that AG was probably not defeated for anything that he had done, but probably more because the governor and his party went down. You see just at other points more anecdotal AGs that can't keep winning and probably will as long as they want. My friend Tom Miller of Iowa is now in his 10th term. He ran for three terms, ran for governor, so he had a term out. He got back in, and now he's in his 7th consecutive term, 10th term overall. He's a fantastic guy. It's wonderful that he's made his career being a state attorney general. I don't know the folks who are AG of Idaho or North Dakota, but they've obviously have longevity as well. So others, rarely, as I say, the AGs lose. They tend to just either want to run for a different office or they just decide it's time to go back to the private sector and do something different. I want to go to the big 8 states because half of us live in one of these 8 states, half of Americans, and so I do want to do that. Now, I don't even have the political party there. That's a point on national work, but just about all the AGs do is not very partisan. So I'm more interested when I learn about an AG, Attorney General, a new one, is what did she or he do before they were Attorney General? What's their background? And that will tell you things about their priorities. It might tell you a lot. So I go through the states in population order here, and Xavier Becerra was a congressman for years and was appointed by Governor Brown to an open seat. The Attorney General became U.S. Senator, so Becerra was appointed, and he was able to now get a full term. This will be his first full term, but he has been in office for a couple of years. He would have a record one could look at as AG, so the background becomes less important than the record does. Same with Attorney General Ken Paxton, reelected in Texas to a 2nd term as the AG. There's no term limits there. There is in a few states, but that one's reelected, so I don't give more. You can kind of look up his record as AG. The 3rd one, and this is a term-limited state, Ashley Moody. She was a judge, an assistant U.S. attorney. She was a lawyer at Holland and Knight, Florida's kind of best-known law firm, as a starting attorney. So she has really a strong background in a lot of different ways. So that may tell you something about her and what might interest her and what might be priorities from the background. And it's unusual to have a judge because To be a judge and then run for statewide office, you have to you can hold a state senate seat, but you can't hold judge. You got to resign the minute you declare. So she gave up things, but she got something back. New York, new Letitia James. She was the New York City Public Advocate, a citywide elected position. Before that, a councilwoman. The Public Advocate in New York is kind of a descriptive. Not very many cities have that, but New York is by far our biggest city, so it's a role you probably need. Somebody that goes in and protects the public interest in the best way possible. And she certainly developed a name that way. And then when the vacant seat became open fast, she won a very spirited primary, three-way primary. I think she started maybe in third place, but she won it, and then she's won the general, and she takes office right now because it was an open seat. Illinois, Kwame Royale, interesting because he's a state senator, in fact, in Barack Obama's state senate district, Haitian American. So that's a background that, we think about, somebody who's come in, his father did as a physician's son. And that background would affect, anyone's thinking. Anyone who is an immigrant has a different perspective on the country, and so I point that out. Josh Shapiro is in office already, and Pennsylvania runs its elections on the presidential year, the AG elections. So I move on. And then we have two more new ones. You see 5 on that list are new of the 8 big states, and a 6th one is just getting his first term. Dave Yost was state auditor for 8 years, was district attorney in a small county, and then became the state auditor and has served in that role for 8 years. Had the name recognition and had a record certainly as the elected state auditor for Ohio, and then had to move. They have term limits, so he moved over and was elected attorney general. Dana Nessel, also new. She was president of the Fair Michigan Foundation, running an anti-hate task force as part of that work, and before that had been an assistant district attorney. So that tells you some things about the AG's offices, and obviously we will try to keep track on that for the Organic and Natural Health Association.
Thank you, Charlie. Alan, I want to turn it over to you. I just want to remind everyone that Alan is on our board. He's with Natural Grocers, and in that role spends an inordinate amount of time with both federal and state legislators, and wants to put a little perspective on why we should care about all of this. Alan?
Yeah, thank you, Karen, and great job, Charlie. I don't know if any of you bought a ticket for the $1.6 billion lottery and didn't win. I guess you wouldn't be on the call if you did. But a similar thing happened to me because I woke up after Election Day and am friends with my governor, friends with my lieutenant governor, friends with my secretary of state, friends with my treasurer, and friends with the president of the majority leader in the House of Representatives in Colorado, among many other things, including Kristen Sinema and John Tester. And I'm mentioning this because it's taken 10 years to get there, 10 years of showing up at meetings, going out to D.C., having 20 meetings in a day, just pounding the pavement, showing up, making the comments, giving the advice. And a lot of times I have to defend the cost and the time that takes for little old Natural Grocers sitting out in Colorado. But it is tremendously paid off at the moment. And I want to encourage everyone who's listening to remember that this is not a full-time job for me, but I definitely have invested in those relationships. And it's going to be very helpful. The odd twist here, of course, is that when you have a state-controlled in the executive and in both branches of our assembly, this is a potential threat to business interests, right? A lot of consumer protection action and anti-corporate movement. But we actually have a pretty balanced set of Democrats running all of this. But I'll actually be running interference and likely will be appointed to the transition team in a couple of days so that we can keep this guided in the right direction.
That's fantastic. Excuse me
to
interrupt you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations. Go ahead, yeah.
He puts a lot of people. This is Jared Polis. He's putting a lot of people on the transition team, but again, I paid my dues. So I'm expecting to be part of that. So I think that's it, Karen. In the interest of time, just to point out that a guy who's not a paid lobbyist, who didn't know what he was doing 10 years ago, show up, pay attention, go to a few campaign events, write a few small checks, but that longevity completely pays off. And I'm really happy about where we are at the moment, especially in Colorado, but Congress is pretty good too.
Thank you, Alan. I really appreciate that. And I'll say, somebody who's been 34 years in this fair city, to see this kind of shift in terms of incumbents leaving, veterans coming in, women, minorities, and knowing that it's going to be incredibly divisive over the next 2 to 4 or 6 years, I think that we need to, always keep in mind the business case for why to be involved in this work, because we don't do it for sport, although many are in the business to do it for sport, because it is a massive chess game. I think the reality is that we do have an opportunity to impose our own sense of values around health and wellness in terms of planet and people, and with new ideas, and invest time and energy in creating an arena where people can begin to understand the value of individual health and what that holds for society. So that's why I continue to hold out some sort of optimism as the pathological optimist that I am. And I anticipate that Organic and Natural, and this was our first year of really getting involved in these issues, will continue to get more engaged with Jonathan's help and using the expertise that we have around this table, and certainly engaging all of you on the phone more actively. We'll have more to report at the conference. Registration will open soon, by the way, if not today, tomorrow. And with that, I'd love to thank all of my fellow participants here and Venable for supporting our webinar, and feel free to contact any of us. Our information's up there if you have additional questions between now and January. Thank you very much. Have a great day.